To roll the calf, we're gonna start by putting both legs on the roller, moving slowly all the way up towards the back of the knee and down towards the ankle, really focusing on paying attention to finding tight spots. If we find a tight spot, we can add a little bit of pressure or load by putting the other leg on top of the leg we're working on. And then we can move that foot, so pointing and flexing the foot once we're loaded on a tight spot. We want to make sure to get the medial part of the calf. It's often quite tight. Again, finding a spot as we rotate the leg inward and pause on that spot, pointing and flexing the foot. Really want to focus on moving slowly so that we can find areas of tension, tight spots that stand out and sink in. To stretch the lower calf muscle, the deeper soleus muscle, we're going to do the deep lunge stretch where we're using a little bit of overpressure of the chest onto the thigh. We can then angle our knee over the big toe or over the pinky and then back to the center to stretch different parts of the calf. To roll the hamstrings, we can start just with the double leg hamstring roll from the back of the knee up towards the sit bones, seeing if we find tight spots, then add some pressure by placing one leg over the other and slowly rolling from the back of the knee up to the sit bone. Again, looking for some tight spots. When you find a spot, you might hang out there and do some micro movements, really trying to sink in. Now I'm rotating a little bit laterally to get more of that lateral hamstring, and then rotating my leg inward or medially to get more of that medial hamstring, pausing on tight spots. To get a little bit deeper and more intense into specific areas of the hamstring, we can use the ball, placing the ball on a chair under our hamstring and finding a tight spot, and maybe extending the knee and bending the knee to get a little bit of movement and sink the ball in further. Then we're going to move the ball to a different spot on the hamstring. You're working your way from the lower hamstring close to the knee all the way up to the sit bone where the hamstring muscle attaches. To stretch the hamstrings, you can start in a half kneeling position, put one leg out in front and shoot your hips backwards. Keep a slight bend in the knee, keep that back flat, and you can rotate the trunk medially or laterally to get a stretch more focused on the medial or lateral hamstring. You can also do a supine hamstring stretch, pulling the thigh into the chest. Keep the thigh in that position and extend the knee, making sure to hold and get a nice stretch through the hamstring. To roll the quads, I'm going to start on my stomach with the roller under both quads, rolling from the knee all the way up to the hip, finding tight spots. I can make it a little bit more intense here by just putting a little bit more weight on one leg and focusing on putting more pressure into that leg. Again, looking for tight spots that I'm going to hang out on and try to effect change. Then I'm going to rotate to the lateral quads. So this is not quite all the way on my side, but not on my stomach. And I'm focusing on that kind of middle third of the lateral quad. So from the attachment at the knee, right down there is usually quite tight. And then all the way up to the hip, right before the hip bone, spending some time up there and seeing if I can find some tight areas. Then I'll rotate all the way onto my side, focusing more kind of on the traditional IT band roll, getting some of that fascia there. Again, all the way to the knee and all the way up to the hip. I can make it more or less intense by having my legs off the ground or having one foot on the ground to take some pressure off. In this kneeling lunge stretch sequence, we're focusing on the hip flexors, anterior thigh. Want to make sure we're squeezing the glutes, reaching the arm up and reaching the abdomen away from the pelvis to increase that stretch. Then we can sink deeper into the lunge to change the stretch into more of an upper quad stretch. And we can also use a prop such as a wall to increase the stretch through that entire quad muscle, making sure to keep the spine neutral, reaching the arm up to add a little stretch through the side body. You can use a strap if you have one as well to accomplish the same thing. And here we want to make sure we're squeezing that glute on that left side, keeping that spine neutral again, and keeping the hips square. To roll the adductors, I'm going to place the roller under my inner thigh here as I'm in kind of a half frog position. The roller should be approximately perpendicular to my thigh, and I can adjust the position of the roller to make sure that I'm getting different angles of the adductor muscles, but I want to make sure I'm rolling all the way from the knee, close to where they're attached, and up to the pelvis, making sure I'm getting through that whole muscle and finding tight spots along the way. A great stretch for the adductors is a frog stretch. So you're going to slide your knees apart from one another, rest your elbows on the floor, and then adjust the pull of the stretch by moving your pelvis. So you can rock forwards and backwards, you can shift side to side, you can tuck the pelvis under or arch the back a bit, and this is going to change the pull of the stretch. You can also do this in a half frog position with the leg extended, again adjusting the pelvic position to change the angle of the stretch. To roll the glutes, we can first start by sitting on the roller, crossing one leg over the opposite knee, and leaning to that side, so to that right side, just rolling back and forth on the glutes. To get more pinpointed, we can use a ball, placing it right next to our hip, then laying directly onto that ball in the meat of that muscle. And this is going to focus on some really tight spots in the glute medius and minimus. And rather than roll, you just take the ball and move it to another place on the glute. And don't forget to come very far forward near that front hip bone. You're going to find some nice tight spots there. You really want to hang out and sink in and affect some change. To stretch the side of my glute, we're going to do a pigeon pose here. And once we're in this position, we want to make sure that my left hip in this case is pressing down towards the floor to keep the hip square. I can move my foot further away from my body or closer in towards my other leg to change the angle of stretch. To stretch the posterior part of the glute, I'm going to do a seated glute stretch with one leg outstretched, crossing the other leg over that leg, pulling the knee in towards the chest. Nice and tall posture, sitting on my sit bones, pulling my knee further in towards me to increase the stretch.